The moment he stepped onto the jet bridge, he could feel it, the subtle, sharp sting of judgment. Eyes narrowed, faces tightened. And just like that, a man who quietly built an empire was treated like he didn't belong. At 38, a black CEO accustomed to commanding boardrooms, he expected turbulence in the sky, not on the ground. But as he reached for his first-class boarding pass, the flight crew's icy expression froze the moment. They told him he didn't look like he belonged in first class. 12 minutes later, the same crew would learn a lesson they'd never forget. Because the man they dismissed wasn't just a passenger. He owned the jet they were flying. He had built his wealth from the ground up, the kind of story people write books about, but rarely believe. Raised in a modest neighborhood, he spent his early years being underestimated. Every room he entered, people doubted him before they knew him. And every time, he let his work do the talking. Today, he was heading to a global leadership summit, a gathering of industry giants. It wasn't his first time in first class, but this flight was different. It wasn't just transportation, it was symbolic. After years of struggle, sacrifice, and perseverance, this was a flight meant to feel like he had arrived. As the morning sun spilled through the terminal windows, passengers flowed in a rhythmic rush. He moved with quiet confidence, tailored suit crisp, briefcase in hand, unaware of the storm brewing just ahead. In row 1A, his name was printed clearly on the manifest. The ticket was purchased through his own aviation company. Yet, as he approached the gate, the crew's body language told a silent story. One that every black professional has learned to read, suspicion dressed as policy. And in that brief moment, the past crept in. Years of being doubted, questioned, judged. But this time, he wasn't just another passenger. He was the owner of the sky they thought he didn't belong in. The confrontation began subtly. A forced smile from the gate attendant, a double check of the boarding pass, a quiet exchange between crew members, as if they were deciding whether to allow him entry. As he stepped onto the plane, the cabin smelled of polished leather and brewed coffee. But the warmth ended there. The flight attendant guarding first class stiffened, her hand almost instinctively reaching out to block him. Her eyes scanned his tailored suit not with admiration but disbelief. Another crew member whispered something under their breath. Passengers turned their heads. Whispers rippled like static. He had experienced racism before. It wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was a quiet, deliberate exclusion. This was one of those moments. Instead of welcoming him, they redirected him to economy. They insisted his ticket was incorrect. They spoke with the hollow certainty of people who never expected to be challenged. He asked for clarification. They spoke over him. Their words, sharp but polite, wrapped in authority. The scene grew tense. First-class passengers stared, some in awkward silence, others with smirks. The attendant's voice grew firmer. A supervisor was called, and the message was made clear. He didn't belong in that seat. But what they didn't know, what no one in that cabin knew, was that the jet itself belonged to the aviation holding company he built. The pilots, his employees, the flight, operated under a brand he owned. As he stood in the narrow aisle, years of quiet endurance pressed down on him. He had the power to stay silent, to move to economy, to let it pass. But something inside him shifted. This was no longer about a seat. It was about dignity. And this time, silence would not be his answer. He calmly reached into his briefcase, not for his ticket, but for a thin, black leather folder embossed with his company's crest. Inside lay credentials that could end careers with a single signature. Unbeknownst to the crew, the captain in the cockpit worked directly under his board. And in 12 minutes, their hierarchy would be flipped upside down. The captain's voice buzzed faintly over the cabin speaker, announcing final preparations. Passengers adjusted their seats. But in the galley, the supervisor was frowning at the document now in her trembling hands. His corporate credentials. It wasn't just any company. This was the CEO, the owner, the man they had just told to move to economy. Suddenly, the confident tone vanished. The crew exchanged uneasy glances. The supervisor rushed to the cockpit. Within seconds, the captain's calm voice on the intercom broke. The engines, which had begun to spool, went quiet. The cabin lights flickered. Confusion swept through the cabin. A passenger whispered, "What's happening?" The CEO stood still, centered in the aisle, calm as chaos brewed around him. The captain emerged from the cockpit, not as a figure of authority anymore, but as an employee summoned by his employer. The man who was told he didn't belong was now the one everyone was waiting for. Every ounce of subtle racism that had tried to push him down met a silent, immovable wall. With a few quiet instructions, the pilot's fate was sealed. This wasn't just about one disrespectful moment. It was about the culture that allowed it. Within 12 minutes of being denied a seat, the pilot was removed from the flight. The crew, pale and stiff, realized their misjudgment hadn't just cost them their pride. It cost someone their job. The plane didn't take off on time. It couldn't. There was a protocol to follow now, one set in motion by the very man they underestimated. A new pilot was called in, the flight was delayed, and word spread fast. But the CEO wasn't vindictive. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't boast. He simply reminded everyone in that cabin that respect isn't earned by appearance. It's given to every human being. As he finally took his seat in 1A, the silence in first class was deafening. Those who had whispered earlier now avoided eye contact. Some looked ashamed, others just stunned. Outside the cabin, the dismissed pilot walked away down the tarmac. A sobering image of how judgment born from bias can destroy a career in minutes. For the CEO, this wasn't about revenge. It was about responsibility. He had the power to hold people accountable, and he used it. Somewhere in the air, as the engines roared to life again, a quiet truth settled over everyone. You never know who you're really judging